Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited to speak finally at a conference that has teachers in them. I have to say I am a really, really big fan of the Council of Economic Education, and in fact, when they asked me to be on the board, I couldn't think of a better, in a sense, position. I have done a lot of research on financial literacy. My work has been mostly academic up to a certain point, but all of the work really shows the importance of starting early for financial literacy, and that's why the work that you are doing is so important. And I want to really try to speak as little as possible and as quickly as possible, and as an Italian, it's hard to do, because I'd love to really have a conversation with you on this important topic. I have done, as I mentioned, a lot of academic research, but a few years ago I thought that this topic was so important that I've left my little green and isolated campus in New Hampshire to come to Washington, D.C., where I founded the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, which really, whose aim is to promote financial literacy as well. So I hope to translate and disseminate the work on financial literacy, and definitely the topic I'm more passionate about is financial literacy in the schools. So I'm going to try to spend a little bit of time in my presentation as well to tell you about some of the things we do as well at the, as we call it, GFLEC. Clearly, and you all know this, but we live in a very a new economic landscape where all of the changes that we see from the pension to the labor market, where we see these differences in wages across skills, to the financial market, I think there is really a need for a new skill and certainly a need to be able to deal with this increased complexity. And I have to say, I show this slide everywhere. You know, this is not a slide necessarily about the US. These changes have happened in almost every country. And that's why I'm going to take today a little bit of an international perspective and actually say what that international perspective can tell us, for example, about financial literacy. And I'm probably paraphrasing what you say in class, but I really do think that financial literacy is a life skill. In fact, one of the quotes I always say is that, you know, financial literacy is like reading and writing. You know, it's the new skills that people need to be able to go through life. Certainly, one of the most important decisions that people have to make is very early in the life cycle, but that's not the only decision. I think it's critically important that we develop these skills for making decisions and financial decisions, because there are many, some of them not necessarily related to financial decision, but have implications for financial decision that are so critically important. And it's not just about financial decision. I think it's also about living in society. It's about living in a democracy where people are asked to vote on economic reform. So that's why I think the word economic literacy is also very important. If we have to be citizen of a democracy, it's critically important that we understand what the economic reforms are and what it means. And in this time, it's even more important, of course, to understand what the politicians are doing. These slides as well really doesn't talk only about the US. I show this slide in almost every country I talk to. So what I wanted to describe briefly is the findings from this international project on financial literacy that we have done, and so far we have had and published work on as many as 12 countries, but the comparison is still continuing. We really think it's critically important to provide rigorous research on this topic and really evidence-based research that shows not just the importance of financial literacy, but identify vulnerable groups and perhaps speaks of the important why do we need to focus on the young. And I'm going to focus on the young today, but also on another group, which has become, I think, a very important group to look at and very dear to the work we do at our center. And I'd like to bring a little bit this international perspective as we talk about financial literacy. So as I've mentioned, these are the 12 countries that have added the same question that we were able to design for the US, and I'm going to speak briefly about the data set we have used in the US. Unfortunately, we don't have some of the really successful country in PISA, like Finland or South Korea, but we do have a few Nordic countries like Sweden or the Netherlands and Germany, which have participated and we have worked with central banks, Department of Treasuries, and other institutions to be able to have a very consistent set of questions. More recently, and this is actually published in the Journal of Pension, Economic and Finance, in case you like to read economic work or economic research. I actually have a copy with me in case you are interested in this, in reading the actual papers, and there is also a paper about the US. More recently, and this is easily accessible because it's posted online, we have 4 more countries added to the comparison. So that's why we are at 12, and now 10 more have been added. So we have evidence on France, Switzerland, Australia, and Romania. This is particularly important because Australia is making financial literacy mandatory in the school. New Zealand, in the previous set, even though it's not mandatory, really has a lot of financial literacy in the schools. And there are countries which have been really or becoming proactive about financial literacy. We have published it in a special issue of the journal Numeracy, which is a journal for mathematicians. But it's posted online, and the paper can be downloaded online. And now we are looking at 10 countries from Eastern Europe. In the US, and I know yesterday the CEO of FINRA gave a talk, and I think I'm very grateful for the work they're doing in collecting really important data on financial capability. In the US, the first wave was collected in 2009. It's called the Financial Capability, the National Financial Capability Study. And we have a very, very large data set. It starts at age 18, so we don't have data for the high school student, but I'm still going to speak about forthcoming data for high school student. But most importantly, some of this data, now we have the second wave of the National Financial Capability Study, and really thanks to the, I think, important work that FINRA is doing and also their attention they are now devoting to the student. We have added new questions, for example, about student loans. We have had new questions about the young, people while in college or at the beginning of their working life, to try to understand a lot more both their level of financial literacy, so we were able to have the same questions on financial literacy that were added in other countries, and also some specific questions really that can be important for the young. So let me tell you what these questions are, and this is really important to understand. I'm not claiming that this is the way or the quintessential way to measure financial literacy. I just wanted to show you that when you look at some of the most basic principles related to financial literacy and the principles that are at the basis of financial decision making, and we ask them across countries, right, what are we going to get? So that's why I have to take you through, just the wording, and I'm only showing you 3 questions because these are the ones that are most similar, or these are the ones that have been adopted across countries. The advantage of having only 3 rather than perhaps in your test when we might have 40 is that many more countries were willing to just add a handful of questions to their national surveys. So here is the first question, and as you can see, is not even a question measuring interest compounding, it's really measuring basic numeracy. And the question is, suppose you have $800 in a saving account, the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you have in this account if you left the money to grow? We are not asking people to do the calculation, right? We are not asking, is it more than 110, right? So we list the question, do you see it's more than 102, right? And methodologically, because we don't want people to choose at random, we have also added, and it's important, the possibility to choose I do not know or refuse to answer. These questions are asked to a representative sample of the U.S. The population, I mean the adult population, 18 or older, okay? The second question is also very basic, and also asking kind of the day-to-day kind of financial decision-making of an individual. And we try to also replicate how, the financial industry or how we would phrase this question in a newspaper. So it is pedantic because, it doesn't ask it in the simplest way, but we also want to ask it in a way in which perhaps people do speak, in the day-to-day financial matter. So we say, imagine that the interest rate on your saving account was 1% and inflation was 2% per year. After a year, with the money in this account, would you be able to buy more than today, exactly the same, or less than today? Okay? So as you can see, again, basic, simple question. We don't define inflation. So it's a joint knowledge of this question and what inflation is. Okay? The third question had to do about what I believe is a critical component and a critical topic at the basis of financial decision-making, which is risk diversification. This question does two things as well. Because it's more complex, we are testing implicitly the knowledge of a financial instrument, for example, stock and stock mutual funds. And we are also asking a much more complex question, very much in the way in which the financial industry would add it. In fact, this question was taken by a survey that Vanguard distributed to its investor. So the question is, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. Okay? So you might say, these are, in a sense, the question that we are really trying to use and assess also to be able to differentiate among level of knowledge. So what do we find? If you look at the first word of the financial literacy around the world project, as we call it, it can be brief for flat, the flat world. And in fact, the world is flat in financial literacy as well, meaning that we find illiteracy widespread in the population across countries. So, if you think that the US or the people in the US, and I'm going to show in a moment some statistics about the young in the US are not financially literate, well, other countries as well do not show high level of financial literacy. So these patterns of financial illiteracy is prevalent even in countries like Sweden, for example, where the pension system has been privatized and so on, but even in a sense in countries with well-developed financial markets, we see low level of financial illiteracy. Of course, the lowest levels are found in countries where there is less experience with financial markets, for example, Romania or East Germany. And I want to talk about two groups, and that's where perhaps the international study might come into play, which is in all of these countries, the group which look particularly vulnerable, or the group that really know the least are the young, where for us are the 18 and older, and a second group I want to focus on a moment, which are women. So across all of the countries, we find that these are consistently the two groups there are others, of course, but I want to focus on this in particular that really show often a remarkably and strikingly low level of financial literacy. And what the study, this study, now 12 countries plus more, also show is that financial illiteracy has consequences. One of the advantages of studying an older population is you can link financial literacy to behavior. And when we look at the individual, the older individual, which are more financially literate, we find that they are more likely to participate in financial markets. They are more likely to plan for their retirement. In fact, the whole issue of the Journal of Pension Economics and Finance was devoted to planning for retirement. And they are also more likely, and I think this is actually particularly important, to deal with debt and debt management in a better way. So, it is critically important in today's world where we have to make so many financial decisions to, I think, see this type of evidence. Let me now start showing some of the results from the data set. I'll show you the questions just to give you some idea of how simple they are. When we look at the most recent data set in the US, the National Financial Capability Study, we look at people 18 to 23, we find that, in fact, almost 40% do not know the answer to the first question, where they were supposed to guess a 2% calculation, okay? 35% only can answer the second question. So maybe the central bank, since one of the presidents have arrived here, because we have low inflation, people don't seem to know about inflation. And believe me, the implication for policy is not to know more inflation, but it doesn't seem that that's a topic they seem to know about. And the topic that they know the least is risk diversification. And this is actually true across countries. This is the questions that gets the lowest correct response rate, but it is particularly low among these young people. When you look at the first, you might argue the third question is particularly difficult, but if you look at the answer to the first two questions, which are particularly simple, we find that only 30% of the young in the US know and are able to answer this question correctly. Overall, this is true in every country, and I want to report here the data for Germany to show that overall Germany does a little better in answering this question, in particular the first one, so the level of numeracy is high, but we always see this ham-shaped profile. And I don't mean this is an age effect. It could just be generation, and different generations are different. But we always see this shape where the young and the old at the moment are the ones that display the lowest amount of knowledge if we measure knowledge with these three simple questions. And in a sense, it's important because the young have to make so many financial decisions. Let me turn to a topic that is very dear to me because it took this international comparison to make me realize that there is such a strong gender difference in financial literacy. We find in every country a very large gender difference, meaning women and men answer this question very differently. But the interesting thing is that women, they answer in the same way to the financial literacy question in countries as different as Sweden, Italy, Germany, Russia, or the US. They answer in the same way, and they say, I do not know. This is, in my view, a very important finding, and something that is, I think, really important, because not only women do not know the answer, but they are willing to say they do not know. So they are probably one of the best group to target. And to me, this has been so important because after 20 years of teaching at Dartmouth, it's only when I look at this data that I realize that when I go to the classroom, I am teaching to the male student, not to the female students. So if there is something that I would like you to take away today is really this, to realize that the student you are going to get are often not financially knowledgeable. I think you know that. But the other thing is that the male and female student in your classroom are probably motivated differently by this topic, and providing them with information which comes in this very mathematical and in this very specific jargon might not be an effective way in which women might be motivated, or we have to take into considerations, I think, these differences in learning. And we are doing really a lot of work on this topic to try to understand what is this do not know telling us? And is it confidence? Is it because we are using this very technical term? Is it because we are talking about finance? And we have done a lot of work on this, and I could talk about this for hours, but I was told to be brief. So just to give you some idea of how large the differences are, and I reported the one in the US, and I've chosen actually an age group just to tell you, even the young women, modern and at the beginning of the life cycle, when they are in the job market and they are making financial decisions, in every single question they respond, do not know, and this is true across 12 countries. I also want to show you something else which is related to a topic of why it is important to have financial literacy in the school. In one study in the US, we were able to follow teenagers, so 12 to 17 for 10 years, and look at their financial literacy when they are 23 to 28. And so we have found actually a lot of interesting features about them, and two results are particularly important. One is that these young people really display a very low level of financial literacy, a finding which is true across countries. We also find that there is a strong correlation between the family background and the knowledge of their financial literacy at that age. So for example, if you look at, and here I'm reporting the mother education, and this is actually a little stronger than the father education, there is a very strong correlation. So children that come from family where the mother has a college degree are substantially more likely to be financially literate at the age 23 to 28. And I'm probably sure you see in your classroom that perhaps the people which are more financially knowledgeable are the people with the college degrees. What we were able to find here as well, because we can look at these people across 10 years, we found that the young people aged 23 to 28 are more financially knowledgeable if parents actually had saving or investment in stocks when those young people were 12 to 17. In other words, a lot of the socialization probably started at home, and this is why women might not learn if we don't socialize women to talk about finance, or if we don't have it in the school, maybe not everybody has an access to financial literacy, something that I'm going to come back to in a moment. But in the future, having female students which are more financially literate might also trickle down on their children's education. Just in the US per se, we can compare the data between 2009 and 2012, and I have to tell you that financial literacy has not improved in those 3-year period, if any. When we measured the correct answer to this question in the population, financial literacy seemed to have decreased more than increased in the population, okay? And we also see a lot of signs of financial distress, in particular among the young. We have questions about being worried about student loan, and I cannot tell you how much people are worried about student loan. Not just actually the very young, which are super worried, But even people after the age of 30 continue to be worried about student loan and to be able to pay them off. And there is actually a lot of evidence, a lot of study. We are preparing the work on this to show how vulnerable these young people are and how much debt, by the way, they are dealing with. So the people who deal with student loan are actually having credit card debt. They use payday loans and high-cost method of borrowings. They have already borrowed their retirement account. So I think there are lots of behavior that we have to look at when we look at the young and not just the college-educated. And an interesting finding of this data set is that there is overwhelming support when you ask a representative sample of the US population whether we should have financial literacy in the school. 89% are actually favorable and said that financial education should be taught in school. So why is so important for the young? There are so many challenges for the young at the moment. I'm just thinking aloud about their job challenges, the growing government debt that need to be repaid, rising healthcare costs, living longer, retirement risk, the lower potential return on saving and investment, right? There are so many, I think, compelling reasons, but the data, I think, speaks very strongly about the need to have financial literacy in the school. And if we look at the decisions that the young have to make, some of these decisions are incredibly challenging, and asking these young people to take up student loans and also all these other financial kind of borrowing they are involved with, I think really speaks of the importance of financial literacy. So I really do think it's critically important to prepare the new generation for this new world, and I think it's important because we need to have them financially literate before they engage in this decision. We see so many decisions already being taken by the people at age 18. And I also want to talk about equality. At the moment, if you look at the proportion of people, the young people who are financially literate, they are disproportionately male, white, from college-educated families. So, without that access, I think in the school, many, including the women, which are such a big part of the population, might not have this access to financial education. I want to highlight and talk briefly about, the fact that internationally, of course, financial literacy has now been considered kind of the new skill that you need to have. And as you might know, the Program for International Student Assessment that measure financial literacy that measure knowledge among 15 years old has now added financial literacy among the topics that it measures. And I want to actually report here what the OECD PISA measures. And this is, by the way, not covering financial literacy, is what they attempt to measure when they are looking at the knowledge of 15 years old. And what you see here is a question like, are students well prepared for future challenges? Can they analyze, reason, and communicate effectively? Do they have the capacity to continue learning throughout life? So it says every 3 years, the PISA answers these questions and more. It assesses to what extent students near the end of compulsory education have acquired some of the knowledge and skill essential for full participation in society. This is not a definition of financial literacy, but it could be, right? This is why financial literacy has become, in a sense, a skill that we really need, and without which, indeed, people might not be able to fully participate in society. So I'm happy to report that the 2012 module is ready, completed. It will be officially released in June 2014. 18 countries have participated, among which the US. So in June, and by June 2014, we'll be able to see financial literacy compared in the US compared with other countries. And I think we hope that this could also create an impetus to really have and try to push financial literacy in the schools. So I want to say, but how can, given that, how can we make financial education work in schools, and what can this international research also suggest, for example, for teacher and for financial education in the school? When we have looked at these 12 countries, we have seen that in many of them, or in those that have financial literacy, they start early. So New Zealand has this great phrase which says, our financial education is from 5 to 105, okay? So it's critically important to also make it rigorous, and when I've looked also at the curriculum that some of these countries have, it's a rigorous curriculum, and it's not a set of how-to or simple rules. It's really emphasizing critical thinking, and of course, training the teacher is so important. And as well, engaging other agents as well. So let me go quickly through some of these points, kind of try to bring as well this international perspective. I cannot speak enough of this initiative of the Council for Economic Education and the National Standard for Financial Literacy that has resulted from their project. A set of experts have been put together to design those guidelines. I hope you have seen this work. You can download these standards. Of course, they are not mandatory, but I think they provide such an important guide if the teachers are teaching financial literacy to, for example, have this curriculum. Sometimes having so much choice or having so many curriculum can be counterproductive, and I think here CE has really done this wonderful job of putting together, teachers and policymakers and also academics to try to design this curriculum. Well, should it be standalone? Well, we can embed financial literacy in other courses. This is also what is done in other countries as well. And at Dartmouth, we were very passionate about this, and we have designed 11 modules together with a team of mathematicians, so that this financial literacy module can be added into math courses. If you are interested in this, you can download the material. It's both for teachers and for students, and they are simple financial literacy modules, interactive, to help both in the classroom, both in college and in high school. How about train the teachers? This is just so important, and again, I want to praise the work of CE for that. We know, and when the teachers were interviewed in this survey done by the National Endowment for Financial Education, that only 20% of the teachers admitted they are comfortable teaching financial literacy. But the most important things, and the reason why there is such an interest, in a sense, in financial literacy, is that the teacher themselves thought it was important, and also they thought that they could themselves benefit for financial literacy. So if people actually want something, I think you are half the way there. It's so important to have a group which is actually interested in this topic. The countries that are making financial literacy mandatory, for example, Australia and UK, have done a lot also in the teacher training, and this is, I think, another experience on which we can learn. Of course, we do need, in a sense, both parents, I think grandparents. As an Italian, I think grandparents are even better than parents. To be involved in the schools, and perhaps we hope that their involvement can also help and promote financial literacy. But I also hope that without that, we can all become ambassadors of financial literacy. If each of us could be proactive and at least require our school district to have financial literacy, I think we could start making some progress. I want to end by telling a little bit what we do at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center to promote financial literacy. The first thing we do academic research because we want to document this need for financial literacy both in the US and across countries, and to disseminate that research as well. We also teach, and now at GW, we have a new course on personal finance, both at the undergraduate and at the graduate level as well. I teach MBAs as well, both to be financially knowledgeable, but also to engage in this job as their future career. And we do a lot of initiative to promote financial literacy. One that I want to mention, because I'm particularly proud of, is now this International Federation of Finance Museum. Recently, I was put on the board of this new museum in Italy. It's called the Museum of Savings. It's in Turin. I'll really very much invite all of you to go and visit this museum and also to visit Italy. There are two good reasons to go. And just I want to show you a little bit how it looks like. It is an interactive, very sleek museum. After all, that's Italy. And where we are teaching, kind of this basic concept in a very fun way. So for example, this is a room where you can play games, where you can look interactively, and also you can watch movies that have this financial literacy content. And so you go through these 5 rooms that are really interactively and actually speaking about, try to teach basic financial literacy, and there is actually a monetary history as well. Recently, together with the museum, with the Chinese Museum of Finance, the museum in Italy, and the Museum of American Finance in New York, we have created and launched an International Federation of Finance Museum. We met in New York in June with a lot of more than 15 countries, and we are going to create this International Federation. But what can the federation do? Well, we have chosen the word a beacon of light for financial literacy. We want to be ambassador for the work of PISA. We want to provide an opportunity to learn in a very fun way. And we want to have, for example, new and innovative idea. For example, there is a financial literacy academy when people can come and we can support not just students but also teachers, have special exhibitions about financial literacy, for example, the history of the Fed, and make financial literacy relevant and fun. And that's why we have financial literacy game, interviews with entrepreneurs, and so on. So that's kind of one of the new initiatives that we are doing. We are also organizing the 2nd Global Financial Literacy Summit. Is in Amsterdam this year, November 13. You are also invited to attend. And we have a morning session just dedicated to financial literacy in the schools. And the countries, the representative we have invited to present are the ones which have already financial literacy. So we are going to have Australia, the UK, and several people as well from the Netherlands, some of the European countries, which actually are going to discuss how they did financial literacy in the school. We are going to talk about training the teacher. We are going to talk about effective ways to provide financial literacy in the schools. So to conclude, financial literacy is incredibly important, is in my view like reading and writing. It's an essential skill for the 21st century. Imagine how could you live in society if you were not able to read and write? But in fact, if you're not financially literate, it would be very hard to live in the current today's society. And as the PISA OECD says, it's essential for full participation in society. Citizens are asked to vote on economic reform disproportionately more so than in the past. And it is a global issue. Everybody is really affected by it, and that's why we can learn from other countries as well. I know that everybody says, and there is a lot of kind of maybe even some sentiment against financial literacy because it's expensive, but ignorance is not a good alternative. And as the famous president from Harvard says, ignorance can be a lot more expensive than knowledge. A lot of people have told me, or I have heard this comment several times at conferences, which is that financial literacy is not a rocket science. I cannot disagree more. It is science, and I think it is really based on a lot of important concepts, and in the way I do my syllabus, actually we really use a lot of math and statistics, and we make it as rigorous as possible. And believe me, it's a rocket too. And if people are so financially illiterate, I think the $1 trillion student loan will be a big rocket that will fall squarely on our head. Thank you.